Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to assemble a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. This is episode 30, Filing in an Antinet Zettelkasten. 3 good choices for my card. Yesterday, my podcast was about an interesting concept called a cascade that arose from a book that I'm really enjoying by Lisa Feldman Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. The interesting idea of a cascade, she spoke of it in regard to an emotion. It feels almost as though emotions are triggered because they come together full-blown in an instant. And in that instant, she points out that it's actually built up from the lowest level upward, and a whole cascade of connections is made that are not necessarily verbal, although there can be verbal elements within it, but it's just kind of this seemingly almost disorganized collection of neurons triggering that collectively make up an emotion. And it functions in a pattern that just is almost like being triggered. Well, I enjoyed that card very much. I made a main card for it to go in my Zettelkasten. And so the next question is, where is that card going to be filed? When I go to file a card, as I've said before, first I start with a new thought that was interesting and relevant to what I'm doing. I put that thought down, and then before I file the card anywhere, I put my reaction to the new information. And to me, that it reminded me of when you suddenly remember what you wanted to say. That comes back almost as in all together, and a complete thought comes back in an instant. So then the question comes in, well, where do you file it? And for me, the next step is to set up the hashtags. What are the key terms that are present in this card? And I came up with brain, emotion, and cascade. So the next step for me is to go to my index, my trusty Zettelkasten here, and look up relevant cards to find out which card in my Zettelkasten is the most closely associated with this one, because I want to be filing this card next to the card that is most closely related to it already amongst the existing cards in my Zettelkasten. And I found myself being sent in 3 choices of direction. The first choice of direction that came up for me was a link to the brain, obviously, because we're talking about brain functions here. Another thought connection came up through emotion, and that tied into a thought on writing. And a third one came up that had to do with the Zettelkasten itself, filing. And interestingly, it came up about the concept of filing a card in a Zettelkasten. So that was rather interesting, because I'm in the middle of filing a card in a Zettelkasten, and the card I'm filing has a connection to the concept of filing a card in a Zettelkasten. That one was a rather interesting one. So let me share what I found with that one. The existing card on the Zettelkasten suggested that when you go to the index and you're searching for a key term and you see one that on first glance it doesn't seem like it's really a good fit, don't be in too big of a hurry to reject the possibility of that being the place for your card. Go check it out, because even if it's not the place you're going to want to file your card, oftentimes just thinking about making a connection just lights up your brain, and it's a whole lot of fun. It's an exploratory type of a mental connection that is it's pleasant, it's exhilarating, whether or not you actually find a connection. So that was one interesting place I could put my note. But when I went there, I realized that there was actually a whole subtree of information already in my Zettelkasten, and it occurred to me that, wow, that really is the equivalent of a cascade, because even though a Zettelkasten, of course, is going to happen in slow motion as you read through those cards, you're getting a whole subtree of information that's relevant. I thought that was so interesting that I made a connector card for my thought on how a cascade is similar to a subtree in a Zettelkasten that you reach on an index search. And so I created a reference to the card in that location. The next key term index took me to a card that had to do with language learning. And it's the concept of when you're struggling to get the meaning of a sentence in a language that you don't speak very well, when suddenly you get it, the whole thing comes together in once. So that's kind of like a cascade as well. And it made me think about that, in fact, whenever we're trying to comprehend something difficult, and it doesn't have to be in a foreign language, it could be in a subject matter that's dense, when we finally make that connection, the whole thing comes together at once, and you get that burst of delight that you get it. I understand now. And that, in fact, is also a cascade. So cascades are definitely not exclusively emotions, but they're often emotional. And in fact, there's another type of emotion that occurs when you're searching for understanding of a difficult material, and you rack your brain and you try and you try and you try and you don't get it. You get a different kind of emotion. You get an emotion of frustration. It's not nearly as pleasant, and it's not even a cascade, but I thought that was relevant because you can get a cascade that is pleasant, and a non-cascade can be very frustrating. But yet, there was a third type of connection, and the third connection is the one where I decided to actually place my card. The other two, I placed links to my card because it was really interesting that it applied in two other places. And in this one, the reason why I ended up filing my card on cascades in this one is because it has to do with writing. And the central core of what I'm trying to do is take the study of psychology and philosophy and theology, the place where they all come together has to do with human motivation. And I want to carry all of that into the field of writing so that we can have a really broad emotional base for the writing. And it came to a card that talks about having to step back from your writing to the point where the writing goes cold. And the reason for that, it occurred to me, is because of a cascade. If you're too close to what you just wrote, there's a very good chance that the words on the paper will trigger a cascade of emotion based just on your recollection of how you were feeling when you wrote the piece. And it's an advice that's often given to writers to step back from the work and let it grow cold to see if the words on the page really do contain the level of emotion that you were feeling at the time that you wrote those words. So the cascade can be brought about in that case by recollection more than by the trigger of the words that were actually present on the page. And the card that was already there that cascade went with is the concept of having a solid emotional vocabulary. Because if you have a solid emotional vocabulary that is tied to the struggles that people since the dawn of mankind on earth have felt, then you know the emotion that you're writing onto the page, and you know that the words themselves do contain the emotion. That gives you a tremendous time advantage because you don't have to step back for a long period of time to find out whether the emotions are there. You know they're there because you put them there. So I thought you might enjoy. The numbering system isn't terribly important. The important thing in a Zettelkasten is finding where you want to place the card. Then your job is to come up with a number on the card that will put it there. And if you have any kind of a system, you'll find a way to number the card so that it goes where it goes. So I wouldn't fuss too much over what numbering system to have. You just need a numbering system. I've got 3 different numbering systems in my Zettelkasten, and they work just fine. If I'm filing in an area that has an older number system, I keep using that number system. If I'm filing in an area that uses a number system I'm more aiming towards these days, then I use the new numbering system. The whole point of the matter is that you have a quality index that can get you to the amazing ideas in the Zettelkasten and all the excitement that you get when you make these kinds of connections. So thank you, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.